Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 21, Deep Dive, Networking, 3, ISPs and Wireless. So, when I started the idea of doing a deep dive on networking, this is actually the first episode that I wanted to have planned out, but I wanted to get through the other ones first to kind of, set a baseline for what networking is and yada, yada, yada. This one is more basic than really the other two combined, mainly because this kind of involves the general use of networking and how normal people use it today. If you are an IT person, this will probably be no new news for you, but if you are a business owner or somebody who doesn't normally work with wireless or networking in general, and you just kind of have it in your house and you use it and you've set it up yourself based off of the manuals, this will probably be pretty useful to you. So I hope you guys find value in this. But anyways, moving on. We'll start off with ISPs, Internet Service Providers. Internet Service Providers are basically who you pay to gain access to the internet. Classically, in the world of dial-up, it used to be AOL and, Earthlink, Juno, NetZero. Man, there were a ton of internet service providers, and there were a lot that were free or near free. And basically, with dial-up internet service providers, they would have a number that you would call into dial-up, and you'd get this really, I don't know how else to explain it, but chirpy sound coming out of your computer when it connected to the internet. And basically you would connect at a speed of somewhere around 56K, and you'd be able to browse the internet, and it wouldn't necessarily be very fast, but you'd be able to do everything you wanted. And services like AOL would sell based off of things like, oh yeah, we have fast internet, we have email, and all of this. But basically, those are just value adds. Internet service providers only really are supposed to, at a basic level, only provide you access directly to the internet. They don't need to provide you email. They don't need to provide you with security services. They just, in general, really only have to provide you with access to the internet. Now, internet service providers can be rated on several different things, but primarily what they try to sell themselves on is their bandwidth. And it used to be, and probably still kind of is, that internet service providers will sell themselves as broadband, quote unquote. And broadband is an actual definable term. It's not a marketing term. It's actually definable. Broadband is now, as of this week, any internet connection of at least 100 megabits in bandwidth. And so broadband means that you have enough communication bandwidth to go up and down to the internet. And we'll cover kind of what that means in general in a little bit, but know that the classes, there are different classes of connection to the internet. There are several different ways you can connect to the internet. One is dial-up. Obviously, you have a dial-up modem that you use to connect through a phone line. This is ancient. Very, very, very few people actually still use this. Most people use some of the more modern methods, such as DSL, cable, satellite. There's wireless internet. There's fiber, and all of these provide different positives and negatives and different ideas. But now, aside from dial-up, most of them are marketed as broadband. DSL probably not so much, because DSL only ranges from, I think, 2 megabits up to 25, maybe 50. DSL direct, I actually forget what DSL stands for, and I'm going to be too lazy to look it up because it doesn't matter because it's shit. But that depends on a couple of things. One, you have to have a phone line in order for it to work, so that's why it's dying. But also, the speed kind of depends on how close you are to the provider, and it's just awful. Like, it's an awful internet method to go through because it is inconsistent. And so cable modem is probably what everybody thinks of when they think of modern internet service providers. They probably think of companies like Cox or CenturyLink or Comcast. They think of these guys, and it's cable internet, and it comes with a cable modem that may also be a router, and your internet connects through this. Basically, you have a normal cable TV cable that you plug into this device that then plugs into a network that then provides you internet. Magic. But cable internet in general is a little faster. It's a little bit more consistent. And the positive about cable internet is that actually it works off of a standard that is improving year over year. And so eventually cable internet will get pretty fast. In fact, I think Comcast boasts 2.5 gigahertz, 2.5 gigabit over their connection as a max, and they're doing an experimental release. I know they have it here in Colorado, but there may be other places that are doing it. Then you have things like fiber internet. This is probably what a lot of people are hearing about now. Fiber internet. Fiber internet is basically fiber communication is a communication standard that operates off of a laser link, literally a laser coming from the source to your destination. And it uses an optical line, fiber line, to carry the laser signal from source to destination. And fiber internet is really, really nice if it is done right. The problem with fiber internet is that the cables are extremely fragile because they are glass, because they have to that's how they carry the laser signal. So if there's any bends or breaks in the cable, you're done. A nice thing about cable internet with regular cable internet is that cable internet is a little bit more robust. You can bend the lines. If you get a small kink in the line and there's some communication issue, it will still work, kinda. But if you have a kink in the fiber line, that's it. You're done. There's no way it can communicate in. It's not going to be kind of working. It's just either on or off. But generally, fiber lines are very useful, very very easy to get fast speeds through, and generally a very good buy. And they work off of similar companies like CenturyLink, who provide those services. And the nice thing about fiber is that it is probably the quickest communication in latency terms, meaning the time it takes from source to destination of any of these other solutions. Because like the next solution, which is wireless, works off of the cell phone network and this one can definitely be more affected by use level than other solutions. So with wireless, if you have the more people you have on the circuit, the more people you have broadcasting their wireless signal, the slower your communication is going to be. And then there's satellite. And satellite sounds amazing because you are able to use it anywhere. But the problem with satellite is that because the signal has to go from the surface of the planet to space, it is a slow communication path. It is literally slow because of the latency involved. It can take upwards of a second and a half for the signal to complete. And so you may be able to get fast speeds, as far as megabits up and down, but the rate at which you're able to send and then receive is delayed by a second and a half. So you can send out as much as you want and you can download as much as you want, but you're not gonna get it quickly. And so really depending upon your use, you probably won't want satellite communication. And it kind of goes the same thing with wireless. So what does that mean? Latency in terms of use case and things like that. Well, if you are using your internet for things like playing online games, You probably want as low as latency as possible, because the more latency you add to your connection, the more delayed your reaction times are going to be, and it is going to be a worse experience for you as a player. But latency also has impacts in the business realm. Things like certain functions won't work if you have too high of a latency in your communication. So, for instance, I have a client who has multiple sites that are scattered across the United States. And in some of these sites, there are no internet service providers except for satellite. And so these remote areas are connected to the internet through a satellite link. But these sites can't establish a VPN connection back to their office because of how delayed that communication is. And they can't establish a network connection to the servers or anything like that. They can really only get internet. And so they have to utilize a different kind of file structure than the rest of the company. And so latency is important. Latency kind of dictates how you can use your internet. And you have to understand that if your latency is too high, then your experience with your internet is going to be affected. Whereas if your latency is low, you'll be able to use it really for whatever you want. And so you need to understand when you're paying for your internet, you need to kind of understand your use case and what you want and what you're going to get. Because a lot of companies will try to blow smoke up your ass about what you're buying. And the primary way they do this is by selling you lightning fast speeds, or, speeds are out of this world, or whatever the fuck they say. They try to sell you this whole rigmarole about how much speed you're going to get with the internet. And the unfortunate part is that it's really hard to tell the bullshit claims from the actual claims if you have no idea what these terms mean. And so when they're talking about speeds, they're talking about the bandwidth, what your maximum upload and download rate can be. And they communicate this in ways that can be confusing. And so one of the ways that they communicate this is they say, we sell gig internet. And if you don't know what that means, that can sound really good or it can sound really shitty. It kind of depends on where you're at. But gig internet, what they typically mean is the communication, the maximum bandwidth that you can communicate to is 1 gigabit. And that means that your maximum communication standard can be a 100% at 100% utilization can be 125 megabytes. A megabit is basically an eighth of a byte. Byte. Bytes are separated into 8 individual pieces, and each one of those pieces is a bit. And that is how computers in general work. You have bits and bytes. And there's a whole mathematical reason why it's 8, and eventually I'll probably cover that, especially when we go into networking, and when we go into the networking aspects of calculating network subnets and things like that. But just know that when they're selling you speeds, they're selling it in megabits or gigabits, which is an eighth of its actual speed in real person terms. So when you're downloading something from, say, a website, and you're like, well, I'm not getting the maximum speed. I thought I was getting a gig speed. You're getting that speed divided by 8. Now, the other thing that you need to understand about their sales tactic is that they're selling you the aggregate speed of your internet. And so internet service providers, one of the things they can do is they can throttle your connection down to individual sessions. And so they can say every session can use no more than this amount of traffic. They can basically do a QoS, quality of service, and identify each individual session as having a very limited chunk of that total bandwidth speed. Now, they're technically right that your maximum download rate can be 1 gigabyte or 1 gigabit. Sorry, 1 gigabit, but the in aggregate is what they mean, and that means that you're not going to be able to use the full speed on any one connection. You're only going to be able to download at 100 megabit per download, or 25K per download. It really doesn't matter if they're separating it, if they're slowing it down per session like that. They can do whatever they want. And so you need to understand that. You need to understand if it's in the aggregate or if it's every connection can utilize that maximum speed no matter what. And again, when you're using your internet, what you have to understand is that everything you're doing on the internet takes some of that bandwidth. And so if you are using 4 connections on the internet and you are downloading stuff with all of them, like you're watching a movie, you're downloading a file, you're doing work, and you're listening to some music because you're an insane person listening to music while you watch a movie, those all take bandwidth. And the other thing is that they are not separate; they are not split evenly. Certain services require more bandwidth and then are put on a higher priority than other services. And so you may be able to download at 750 meg until you start watching a movie, and then all of a sudden your file download drops down to 10 meg because your movie is eating up all that bandwidth. So you as a user have to understand that when you are connecting at a megabit and you've bought this service, that whole thing kind of is dependent upon what you're using, and you are not going to be able to download at a gig for every connection you have. It's just not going to happen. So the other thing that they'll tell you is that it's a gig, and then in tiny little letters it'll say up, or it's a gig down. And typically when you see things like this, it is called an asynchronous connection. And what that means is that your upload speed and your download speeds are different. Typically your download speeds are faster than your upload speeds, especially with residential connections. On a standard cable internet connection, I think Comcast offers like 350 megabits down and 25 megabit up. And what this means is that you can download at 350 megabits, but you can only upload at 25. And so if you're attempting to share files out, if you're attempting to send data out of your connection, you're only able to upload that at 25 megabit. Now, classically, people using the internet were only downloading files. They really weren't sending much up except for, the information that they had to browse the internet. But now, modern internet users, modern traffic, we do a lot of uploading. You fucks on TikTok and whatnot are uploading just absolute shit tons of data. And this is changing how internet service providers are offering their services. In fact, if you use a cell phone, a wireless internet provider, your upload may actually be faster than your download, or at least have more bandwidth than your download. So just understand that your upload is part of the internet connection and can have an impact on how you use it. Because if you have a slow download, or if you have a slow upload, if you don't have that much upload bandwidth, you might have the wrong internet provider, or you might need to change your contract or whatever to have a wider bandwidth in your upload. And now, all that being said, with internet service providers, the shitty thing with internet service providers is that their customer service is really just shit. It is shit. Comcast has been rated, and I know this is a controversial term, sure, but Comcast has been rated the worst customer service company in all the companies ever, and rightly so. I mean, I'm not going to give them a break. Their customer service is pretty shitty. They're only concerned about taking your money and making and keeping you a customer. And that's really it. And so they put as many roadblocks in between your ability to get actual service and your ability to change a provider as possible. They do this, and it is an incredible hassle to do anything with them from a perspective of service. Now, to their benefit, or to as an understanding mechanism, you have to realize that these service providers, Comcast and CenturyLink and all of them, they're having to deal with the dumbest people on top of some of the more knowledgeable people. And so they're getting calls from people who are very pissed off about how they're not able to stream all of their media at the same time and download their porn and talk to their mom and dad and take videos of their dog and post it on fucking TikTok. They're getting these people who are like, I paid for gig internet and I'm not able to use all of it all the time, and they get pissed off at this. And to their credit, they try to do a good job of kind of staving off these questions before they reach customer service people. But that is also why it is difficult to deal with the customer service, because they're having to deal with morons on top of you who probably know what you're doing and have called in 6 billion times. So as a service provider, you have to, as a customer, if you ever call into one of these, please give them the benefit of the doubt and understand that they are probably having to deal with so many other people than just you, and realize that their customer service sucks, but it's because they have to deal with every class of person, not just the knowledgeable ones. So that's ISPs. And we're going to go into wireless now, which is the next progression of where your internet comes in. And so normally, if you're just a normal person, you probably utilize wireless internet or wireless communication, Wi-Fi. You probably have a Wi-Fi router or access point in your house or at your office that you're using right now. You're probably not connected with a wire, because that's how networks have progressed. And so understanding wireless, having had the conversation about maximum communication and the bandwidth, that'll help speed this along quite a bit, because wireless works on the same manner. You have a maximum bandwidth. And so with today's standard of Wi-Fi 6, your maximum communication can be somewhere around, what is it? It's like 1.5 gigabyte with that communication standard. And Wi-Fi 6 is now being overtaken by Wi-Fi 7, and they've already established the next Wi-Fi generation, Wi-Fi 8. And so your maximum download rate, your maximum bandwidth for these wireless providers, again, is based off of a lot of different factors. But primarily what it's based off of is how many devices are connected to your wireless network. If you have a single wireless access point, a wireless router, that everything is communicating to, your maximum download rate is split between each individual devices. Now, it's not split evenly, but again, it's split. So if you have 30 devices and you have 600 megabit or 600 megs of bandwidth, it can be split across each one of those devices, and it can be split evenly or not. So if you have devices using a lot of internet, it can swallow the bandwidth and make it almost impossible for you to use if you are working with those devices and services at a constant rate. Now, another thing that will affect speed and affect latency and affect everything with your communication is a range. How far are you away from your Wi-Fi? And one of the things to understand about this is your range isn't necessarily dependent upon how far you are away from your router, because the way that wireless works is that it works off of your band, your frequency, and your frequency and your your bandwidth in a different term. So if you think about how your communication, your frequency is, how many peaks and troughs you have in your communication, your radio transmission, but your frequency is how often that communicates to there. Because your bandwidth is how often that communicates across, basically how often that data is transmitted. And so there are two different kinds of bandwidth. There's the bandwidth for data stream down, upload, download. That's data stream rate. That's normally what we call bandwidth. And then there's other bandwidth, which is how often the information is sent to you, how many times a second is that information sent. And then there's frequency, which is how many peaks and troughs there are in any given time. And all of this combines into how your wireless radio basically ultimately combines into how your wireless radio takes these signals. And one of the things to understand is that even if you are right next to your router or wireless access point or whatever, you may not be, your range to it may be further away than you think, because of the way that the radio signal has to bounce in order to get to your wireless radio, in order for the antenna to pick it up, because it can't just line of sight necessarily connect to your device, because the bandwidth might not be proper. And I'm not going to get into radio theory, but just understand that in order for your radio to capture the signal, being immediately next to your radio is not necessarily better. So the way that the radio signals actually propagate within your house or business or building or whatever is based off of how your walls. That's literally what it is, because the wireless signals are very good at finding holes and finding gaps and bouncing off of things to eventually reach where you're at. And so your range may be, if you are on one side of the room and you have a 300-foot room, but for whatever reason, your radio signal needs to bounce across to come back to you, it could be twice as long as what you think it is. So range is dependent upon a lot of different factors, and they say they'll have a maximum range on there that almost means absolutely fucking nothing. So it's important to understand that, because even if your range says something like, oh well, we have a 5,000 meter range, that is a theoretical maximum. That is a theoretical maximum that you can possibly get, and it is significantly reduced. You can pretty much quarter or even dissect those into a tenth of what it actually is, because the way that the radio waves are affected by temperature and humidity and air pressure, all of that can reduce your signal strength incredibly, to an incredible degree. And so just know that your range that it says on the box of your access point, it may not actually be your true range of your device. And so when you're broadcasting these signals, it is it requires the signal is required to bounce out of the wireless access point. It's required for it to reach, in order for it to reach your device, it has to bounce off of something to get to you. It's not just this magical, like, oh, I'm near it, I can communicate to it. And where we see a lot of this issue is where people buy like these anti-radiation kits for their routers, which is basically just Faraday cages that stop the communication from getting out. They work off of radiation, guys. That's what radio signals are. They're radiation. Now, it's harmless radiation because it's just it doesn't have enough power to, one, pierce our skin, and two, is of a different frequency than it would take to then boil you alive. This communication is so small that if you were to try to use the same energy to power a microwave, you wouldn't even be able to turn on the lights on the clock. That is how little energy is actually being broadcast from a router or a wireless access point. So don't worry about the radiation that is being sent through a Wi-Fi signal. Is kind of what I'm saying. Even with big cell phone towers and radios and like that, things like that, it's barely half a watt. It is not it's not even a rounding error on the energy you receive when out in the sun. It is very little having to do. There's no danger with radio signals and your body. Just trying to get that through your head. So these Faraday cages that people buy to kind of save themselves or protect themselves from the radiation from the routers are useless, and they're actually inhibiting its ability to do its job, which is serve out communication. And the reason why I bring this up is I've had several customers fucking call me because their internet doesn't work because they bought a fucking Faraday cage and stuck the router in it. And man, do I get pissed at that. It's like, what the fuck? Not only are you dumb, but you're double dumb. You paid somebody to prove how dumb you were. Anyways, so that's all kind of how the broadcast works. Now there's the radio frequency at which your stuff communicates can also affect your range and your bandwidth and all of that because your Wi-Fi works off of really typically three different radio frequencies, and that's 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, and 6 gigahertz. And based on the noise inside of your area where you're at, your signal may be affected. And so if you have a lot of Wi-Fi networks, I worked for a place that hosted a bunch of conventions, and during a lot of these conventions, we would have a lot of tech companies come in and use the internet from the convention center, but they would want to use their own Wi-Fi. They'd want to have their Wi-Fi up to protect themselves from our internet, basically. And so when you have 1,000 different companies broadcasting their own wireless internet, that can drown out other signals. And so that can affect how you find one particular signal. And so in this circumstance where you have 1,000 different wireless networks, you may only be able to communicate directly to your access point within like 5 meters or whatever, because that's how much noise there is there. And so, and I say this because where I live, I've got a couple of neighbors whose broadcasts are extremely fucking noisy, and I had to basically drown them out inside my house. I have 6 fucking access points in my house because my neighbors they're broadcasting their shit so powerfully that it drowns out a lot of my Wi-Fi network. And so I know that when you're broadcasting on the same frequencies, if you have a lot of access points around you, or you have a lot of other things that work on those same frequencies, it can affect your network traffic. It used to be that your microwave could affect your network traffic because you turn it on and the leakage from the microwave could cause issues with your network traffic. But now modern Wi-Fi standards should no longer have that problem. But then moving on to the next bit, again, one of the things you need to understand about your Wi-Fi is that if you have 1,000 devices connected to to a Wi-Fi, it's going to slow down your speeds, because just keeping up the connection to those 1,000 devices is going to eat up a lot of the bandwidth potential for your network. And on top of that, it's also going to eat up a lot of the CPU, a lot of the processing power on the wireless access point, because it's got to maintain all those connections. And so if you have a bunch of devices that are connecting wirelessly, it can affect a lot of how you use the internet. And so what you probably want to do in a circumstance like that is buy multiple wireless access points or a mesh network where you have several devices serving up the same network, and they hand off communication to each other based on which signal is stronger. And there's nothing special about a mesh network. It's really just set it up and make sure everything's controlled properly. There are a lot of different providers for this. Orbi, Unify, I can think of a few others. But basically just know that the wireless access points work in tandem with whatever router or central control system that you may have for it to serve out your internet wirelessly. And that can increase your maximum number of devices and also make your range and everything else a little bit better. Like I said, I have 6 wireless access points in here. They're all set up to work through mesh, where I hand off to whichever one is closest in my house. and I have to do that because it's so fucking noisy in my neighborhood that I can't just survive off of a single access point. So, all that being said, that was a lot of information. That was a lot of data, and I've been talking for a while now. So, I will probably have a follow up to this one later. But with all that being said, I hope you guys found value in this. I hope it was at least mildly entertaining for you who got no new information from it. But otherwise, I hope you guys have a great day.